The comic book. Comic books have become a modern phenomenon thanks to their growing popularity from outlets like TV and movies. But how long has the American comic book existed, and how have they evolved over the years? Today, we give you the history and evolution of comics. In the beginning, the growing popularity of newspaper funnies and comics inspired the start of a new type of comic. This comic would be modeled almost after a magazine, and it would feature full-color adventures. The very first comic book superhero to come from these magazines was Superman in 1938. The popularity of this comic sparked the start of other comic book heroes, such as Batman, Wonder Woman, and The Flash. This new spark of popularity in comic books started the first age of comic books ever, the Golden Age. During this Golden Age, many of the popular superheroes like Batman and Superman were all published under the very well-known and popular Detective Comics of this time. But another comic book publisher was starting to form trending heroes as well, Timely Publications, with their popular Marvel comics. Early in the 40s, this publisher started their superheroes as propaganda for World War II. Timely Publications gave birth to the very well-known Captain America, whose first comic appearance is well known for its explosive punch in the face to Adolf Hitler. Timely Publications caught on to the team-ups that Detective Comics started creating between Batman and Superman, and created a team called the Invaders that were led by Captain America and fought Nazi-based villains. Later and later through the 40s, superheroes were turned into American soldiers. Most of the reasons behind this was because soldiers would have these comics sent to them during the war. Soon after the war, though, the interest in superheroes waned, and people wanted more. So comic books began to delve into the land of horror and teen funny books like Archie for most of their publication. But this all changed in 1953, when juvenile delinquency was becoming a rising problem for adults. Experts blamed this juvenile delinquency on comic books. This started the Comics Code Authority in 1954. This new agency would censor the sexual and violent material in future comic books, and the creation of this authority ended the golden age of comic books. After the Comics Code of Authority was created, many comic book publishers stopped publications of most of their horror and teen comics, since these two comic book types were seen as inappropriate. Because of these cancellations, once again, comic book culture shifted back to the superhero. This started the Silver Age. The Silver Age began with the arrival of the all-new Flash in Showcase number 4. The Flash had been changed from the dome-headed Jay Garrick into the new and lighthearted Barry Allen. This comic was very well received, and soon, publishers began writing very appropriate and low-violence stories about heroes. The result of this was the creation of many fun and action-packed adventures with heroes. But superheroes in this time lost their complexity. It seemed that every hero was the same when it came to their cookie-cutter morality. The censorship of the authority made it very hard to get anything like a hero killing a villain or a villain doing something truly diabolical in a comic book. And your result was comics got very stale and boring very fast. Comic book publishers took a huge blow from the Comics Code Authority, and it was time to start being more deceptive. It was no longer a question of, how can I make this more appropriate? It was a question of, how much inappropriate content can I cram into this comic book without being caught? And this led to stories that were creatively edgy. A good comic book from this time was the origin story of Spider-Man, and how he lets his uncle die, but uses that as fuel to become a hero. These types of comics cleverly incorporated ideas like death, but used them to teach some moral lesson. In this time, many heroes we know today were created, like the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, the Hulk, Thor, and the Green Lantern. In the 70s, the authorities' regulations on comic books became looser, and soon comics were able to once again explore grittier themes and make more interesting characters with character flaws. Many comic book fans agree that the end of the Silver Age started in 1973, when Spider-Man's girlfriend died in the infamous Amazing Spider-Man number 121. The comic depicted Spidey's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, being thrown off the Brooklyn Bridge by the Green Goblin, and Spidey's attempt to catch her with his web caused her neck to snap. This shift in the tone of comics sparked the beginning of the Bronze Age. In the 70s, everyone was feeling rebellious, including comic books. With the general public living in a post-Vietnam and post-Watergate era, it was time for comic books to dive into edgier, more morally ambiguous themes. Captain America even trashed the Stars and Stripes after losing trust in the government. After Watergate, Captain America renamed himself Nomad, with the very meaning of the name Nomad being man without a country. Comic books were more confident and began exploring political issues and more mature themes. Villains were more brutal and menacing, and diversity in comic books started to form. Characters like Cyborg and the Teen Titans comic book appeared, and there were also more female superheroes being created as well. The Comics Code Authority began to lose its tight grip on comics, and comic books began to become very popular with adults and teenagers, and were no longer targeted at youth or little kids. Comic books gained a new and much-needed depth at this time, and in the early 80s, comic books began to realize how much they could get away with, and this sparked a new age of much darker comic books being created. This new age was called the Dark Age. The Dark Age began with two amazing and popular comic books for their time, The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. Both of these comic books were standalone miniseries books, and they took on a darker and more mature comic book targeted at adults. These comic books were praised for their philosophical depth and political satire. After the success of those comic books, many others followed suit, with Marvel's Punisher gaining popularity and DC starting to stage dramatic deaths of popular heroes Batman and Superman. However, while this darker tone was popular with adults, the comic books were losing their target audience of children and teens very fast. In fact, at that time it was agreed comics weren't even for those age groups. Also, the comic book industry was also losing its audience of comic book collectors, since many collectors who bought comic books in bulk because of the belief they were valuable found out that comic books were less valuable because of this spike in collectors. Collectors realized that old comic books were so rare and expensive because nobody bought them, and realized their fascination in buying them was making the comics less valuable. This led to the Great Comics Crash of 1996. Comic books lost loads of money because of collectors, and kids weren't buying. Marvel Comics filed for bankruptcy in 1997, and Marvel had to sell the movie rights to characters like Spider-Man and the X-Men to continue publishing, and DC Comics only regained their strength after promising to reboot their whole DC universe after Crisis on Infinite Earths. After comic books regained their strength in 2000, a new age started again, the modern age. This age is still growing to this day, and comic books are continuing to progress in artwork, diversity, and many other subjects more than ever now. The popularity of comic book movies has also skyrocketed comic book sales near the releases of these movies. Comic books are becoming more diverse when it comes to race and gender, and computer imaging has influenced artwork in comics as well. All of this, from the popularity of movies to the expansion of comic book artwork, has led fans to call the modern age the renaissance of comic book culture. So what's next for the comic books of the future? Well, comic books are already looking boldly into the future, with DC Comics bringing back old and popular characters with Rebirth, and Marvel further diversifying its cast of characters. We can only wait to see what is in store, and what new age awaits comic book fans.